one of the things that I've witnessed is that policymakers who have no experience with cannabis, their loved one hasn't had an issue that cannabis has helped resolve, they personally have never had an experience with cannabis that has helped heal them in some way, those politicians they just don't get it. I don't know how else to put it besides they just don't get it. But what we do see is that policymakers, when they've had an experience that's personal to them, a loved one who had cancer and cannabis helped ease their symptoms, a politician who had a child with traumatic brain injury and seizures, that all of a sudden this strange oil is now helping to eliminate the seizures that every medication, every pharmaceutical that they tried just was not covering. They get it. And so it's hard to say, there's a disconnect. There is a disconnect, and it comes down to experiencing it for yourself or having a loved one that has experienced the healing power of cannabis. And, there's this disease of rightness that, people think that they're right. I am right. My perspective is right. And the stigma is so thick around cannabis, and it has been for so many years because of prohibition, that it's very difficult for some people to get out of their own rightness unless they have been in a situation where there was nothing else that they could do, and they clung to this hope and prayer of cannabis, and all of a sudden, wow, this plant medicine is working for my loved one. And once they've had that experience, that disconnect goes away. So you're right, the disconnect between the policymakers and the patients is there. And what dissolves that is experiencing the power, the healing power of this beautiful plant medicine.
Welcome to Effective Cannabis Conversations, the show where knowledge meets curiosity and stigma takes a back seat, where we uncover the transformative potential of cannabis in health. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder. The information we're sharing today is for health awareness only. It is not medical advice or a substitute for consulting your doctor. It is here to help you learn, ask the right questions, and make informed decisions about your health and your care. Welcome to another Effective Cannabis Conversation, where we step into the conversations that aren't being fully had in healthcare or policy, but should be. Today, we're diving into something that sounds like progress on the surface, rescheduling cannabis and the evolving hemp laws. But underneath headlines is a deeper question. Is the system actually changing for the patient or just being rearranged around them? So today, we're not just talking policy, we're talking about what these changes really mean for the person trying to feel better, live better, and be heard. I'm joined by two incredible voices doing the work from different sides of this conversation. Heather Manus, a nurse and founder of CNN Network, bringing the patient and clinical perspective, and Ken Sobel, a lawyer, helping us understand the legal landscape shaping access and protection. Together, we're going to explore where things are shifting, where they're falling short, and what patients need to know. Thank you both for joining me for this conversation. If you could just take a few moments and introduce yourself, and then we'll dive right in.
Debbie, thank you for all the work that you do and bringing this information forward to the masses. My name is Heather Manus. I'm a registered nurse. I've been working in the cannabis nursing, working with cannabis patients for nearly 20 years now. And this is very exciting conversation that we're about to have. And my hope is that it will be a step forward for patients and that more access will be available and that things will. Although it seems a little bit complicated right now, it's my hope that this will shake out to be in the best interest of patients moving forward.
And I'm Ken Sobel, and it will be my pleasure to celebrate on Monday the anniversary of knowing this beautiful woman for 14 years. Nurse Heather is actually the leading clinical cannabis expert in the world, and she was the first medical director for a cannabis facility in the United States, which also makes her first in the world in that. So I follow along really in her shadow. My skill set's a little different. I don't heal people as she does, but I do help people and have been helping people, especially in the cannabis space, for about 26 years now, and have been a lawyer for 46 years. And I live in the Republic of California. About 2 miles just north of me is the California Center for Cannabis Research, which was the first institution of its kind established in 1999. And I live in California, where cannabis is safe and free, not free in cost, but as free as you can possibly get, and pays very little attention for the most part to what the federal government does on many issues, including cannabis. But having said that, I've worked all around the world, and in the United States, I was the author of the Medical Cannabis Patient Care Act for the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Nurse Heather and I have been advocates for basically proving the safety and effectiveness of cannabis for post-traumatic stress disorder. We sued the state of Arizona and actually won and ordered the state to add post-traumatic stress disorder to their list of qualifying conditions for medical cannabis. That then took hold, and now you see that condition as part of most of the 40 jurisdictions or so that have a medical cannabis program. Currently, I do mostly mergers, acquisitions, and consultations, and have some licenses in the cannabis space ourselves. But in addition, we've been advocating for a law known as Ryan's Law, which we may talk about in a little more detail later, which is really an important and profound extension of cannabis patient rights. We got that passed in California by a unanimous legislature and eventually got the governor to sign it, even though the hospital lobby had a separate secret key to the governor's office that we didn't have. But we eventually got it passed in California first, then in Minnesota, where the Mayo Hospital has been a leader on the subject, then most recently in Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and we're pending in some states. And as I told you, Debbie, earlier, we have House Bill 1081 in Arizona. So there you have it. I'm a lawyer in the cannabis space, but I'm also an advocate, and I advocate for the passionate or compassionate care of patients with cannabis.
Thank you both for that introduction, and you can tell from the introduction that they both provided, we are in for a real treat today with this conversation, so thank you for being here. So let's just dive in, and we're going to start off with, right now, before we even talk about policy, what are patients experiencing right now when they try to access medical cannabis for their health, and where are they hitting the biggest walls? Heather?
Yeah, so the good news is, because I always like to talk about the good news is that there is a lot of access to medical cannabis in the United States at this point. Ken, how many states have a legal medical cannabis program?
I round it to 40.
Okay, so there's 50 states. There's really only 10 states where a patient probably doesn't have access to medical cannabis. That is a big deal, because the fact that patients can access the program, and each state is different, so that access looks differently. But here in California, and I'll just speak to California and the ease that it is to access cannabis. If you wish to be a cannabis patient and get a cannabis card, you can do that through telemedicine here in California. So literally over the internet, you can visit with a doctor, let them know what your medical qualifying condition is, and the doctor will verify that and write you your recommendation. And bingo bango, you can go get your medical cannabis. That's one aspect. And I'm speaking for California because we have not only a medical cannabis program, but we're also an adult use state. So if you are a visitor to the state of California and you wish to use cannabis, whether medicinally or just for fun or to give it a try, you can go to one of many licensed dispensaries throughout the state of California. And it's similar to going into a pharmacy. You just walk in, there's products all over. Depending on how it's set up, you can walk down the aisles or go up to the counter, and you can access a variety of state legal licensed cannabis products and take that home. And as an adult, 21 years or older, you're able to access that medicine. Now, Debbie, I know that you're in Arizona and you have the same reality. I started out in New Mexico, which is the same reality now as well. So when we're talking about access for patients, before we had adult use, which came into play in 2016, right, Ken? That was when Colorado and Washington both legalized in 2016. Prior to that, being a medical cannabis patient, it was a little bit more difficult. Now, I have a dear friend who lives in Colorado, and she's a hospice nurse. And I myself in New Mexico had an experience where I had a patient that was on hospice. It took too long to get the medical cannabis card to the patient. And the family contacted me after the patient had died and said, we just got the card in the mail. Okay, that was not okay. So one of the things that my dear friend Marcy from Colorado would say is that adult use cannabis was a game changer for hospice patients because they no longer had to wait for that process of getting a card. The family member can go down to the dispensary, get some edibles, some tinctures, whatever it is that patient needs, and bring it. And what she said is after adult use, she began to see cannabis products of some sort, whether it was a topical, a tincture, whatever, on the nightstand of about 80% of her hospice patients. Now, that's where I really want to talk about access and availability for a patient. And in my opinion, I know a lot of people believe that the medical program is the best, but depending on the patient, really just having that adult use access can be the difference from them having access or not. And I hope that answered your question, Debbie.
That was a beautiful answer. We do tend to speak of in terms of the Republic of California because really access is very, very easy, as it should be here. And so I invite all your listeners to move to California. Come here. Come. What you'll find is that with telemedicine, we can get a patient a medical card or a recommendation in about 15 minutes at a cost of about $40 for a year. And so that access is very simple if they're getting it on the medical side. And California is a little different in that lots of states have, as you know, lists of what qualifies you to be able to use medical cannabis. And they're broken down into certain conditions or certain symptoms of conditions. Those are two categories. California has a third category, and it's any goddamn reason that a doctor believes will help the patient. So we have had, even before adult use, we had 200 different various illnesses and symptoms of illnesses that were already legal as qualifying conditions. And as Nurse Heather quite correctly pointed out, we have about 26 states that are now adult use. So in those states, access is relatively simple if you're 21 years or older. And predominantly the Western states in the United States, for those of you who are listening from somewhere outside of our borders, are probably the most progressive. This year, California celebrates its 30th year as being the first state to have a medical program. We were 1996, Washington and Oregon were 1998, and Colorado was 2000. And then the other states came along. And those cornerstone foundational states, as you'll find, have the easiest access, the fewest barriers, and pretty much the lowest costs. But having asked the question of good and bad, the bad side is it's just too darn expensive. And the states are over-regulating and overtaxing this amazing plant. And those costs are obviously detrimental to especially people who are lower economic means and can't afford it and need it. And so that has to change. Fortunately, in a state like California, we have a right to grow. So you have a personal cultivation. And Nurse Heather is an amazing grower, and she can teach anyone how to grow, except me. But anyone can learn how to grow it. And in California, you have at least 6 plants. In Virgin Islands, I tried to make it up to 14 plants, like New Mexico has. And I was going to allow folks to be able to sell home grow into their system so they could also make a little money, but it didn't quite make it. So we do have on the good side about 20 states that allow personal cultivation, so that helps solve the problem of cost. But there's no reason that the other 20 medical states, or in fact all 50 states, shouldn't always all have a personal right to grow. It's a plant.
It's a plant, exactly. Beautifully said from both of you, and you brought up a lot of questions for me in this that I would like to hone in on. So we have 40 states that have legalized medical cannabis programs. That leaves we have 10 states that don't have any access. Is that correct?
Yeah, some of those, possibly the majority, if not all of them, except maybe one, have a CBD program, which was basically over the Charlotte Fiji case, with primarily directed for children with certain medical conditions. So it's not like there's a clean slate. If you added those in, then it's like 99.4% of the entire U.S. population has something.
And that's good news, because we need something for everyone. But within that, there's also, every state runs a little bit differently with their laws. And so access is not the same. Like you were saying, California, you've got pretty good access, but that's not the same if you were to visit some other states. Where is the best place for someone to learn about what their state's policies are and where they could get guidance?
I'll start off by saying a simple Google search of your state program. So if you know that you have a medical cannabis program in your state, go to the state website for that program, because that's where you'll get the most information. Many times, and it should be so simple, just to go to your regular primary care physician and say, primary care physician, I would like to try this medicine. And they would jump right on that and make sure that you get recommended to your state's medical marijuana program. Unfortunately, most doctors are not knowledgeable. They don't have an understanding. They feel that they can't participate, or this is a Schedule 1 and they don't want to get caught up in that. So many of your primary care physicians will not be open to that discussion. Now, we could talk about how to approach your doctor and that sort of thing, but what you'll find in most states are your cannabis care doctors or your marijuana docs, the doctors that you'll go to, and they will just check to make sure that you have a qualifying condition and then write your recommendation to the medical cannabis program for you, because that's what they do. And it's a simple Google search, look up cannabis doctors in your state, and it should be able to come up, and you'll find how to access a doctor. Through the state website, you'll be able to have a deeper understanding of how your state works, what the medical conditions are. That list of qualifying medical conditions is really important so that you know what to say when you're approaching your doctor. And that's really where it can get kind of hard and narrow for a patient. If you have a condition that's maybe not on the list, now what are you going to do, right? This is where it can get very sticky.
It was very beautiful. I think you explained it all. I mean, we did a lot of research. I had about 10 years where I did a lot of medical malpractice cases. I learned how to do the scientific and medical research. And Nurse Heather organized, she's not only organized the Cannabis Nurses Network, but before that, she had other advocacy groups, and she was the one that really brought forward our whole journey on the post-traumatic stress disorder. That led us to writing about 25 white papers on various medical conditions and how cannabis can help them. And we've basically reviewed thousands of medical journals and everything else. And as you go through all of that process, you realize that cannabis is safe and effective for, maybe 95% of all the various medical conditions and symptoms that we suffer. It's such a broad range, broad spectrum, gentle plant medicine that there isn't a whole lot out there that it doesn't help. So what Nurse Heather says is all the time, go ahead and do your research online, because anybody has typically access, even if they've not got their own personal computer, they go to a library. But just do some of your own research. And it's as simple as asking the Google question about your condition and how it responds to cannabis. And you'll probably find either there on pubmed.gov, you'll find some information, and you take that to your doctor and say, hey, I found this. Take a look at this and see if it's something that you can recommend. That's if you're trying to qualify as a medical patient and you don't want to just use your adult privileges if you happen to be in one of those 26 states that have an adult program.
And I think that this is really key, what you just talked about, is the conditions that it treats. I treat a number of conditions. They're not all on our list of qualifying conditions that we can treat. And I find that disturbing because I think that people would like to know that I'm improving my lung health by using medical cannabis. And I know that sounds crazy when I say that, because a lot of people think there's no way you can do that. But having MAC lung disease and my lung filling up with nodules, I was giving the medical staff all the time in the world to take care of it. I couldn't use any of the pharmaceuticals that they were prescribing. My body rejected them all, and I learned how to use a flower vape and vape cannabis into my lungs. And because of that, I've eliminated 25 pharmaceuticals, and all the nodules are gone. I just have scars that show me that they were once there.
Yeah.
So it's how do we get more conditions on these lists, because nobody's getting notified that this is a qualifying condition, and that we need to be identifying these conditions so that people can actually understand this might help you. Because that's one of my frustrations of my doctors and going into their office and saying, someone in the next room has the same condition I do. Shouldn't we go tell them what I'm doing and how it's helping me, instead of me living in exacerbations and living in poor health? My health is completely turned around. I'm still sick, but it's improved. So how do we make a push to try to change those qualifying conditions?
It's difficult because there's so much focus is now on the adult use side of it. And once you get adult use, you've, in one sense, eliminated a barrier, but in another sense, you've essentially distracted the politicians who ultimately have to rule on these things from really doing anything about it. And so, sadly, Arizona happened to have a process for petitioning that allowed us to have a exact, almost a judicial type process to eventually appeal it and get it added. Most states, however, typically their qualifying conditions are either regulated by the legislature itself or Department of Public Health. And so it's not easy to get new conditions added in this environment. So we have had some really good legislation with Ryan's Law. Oregon, for example, not only broke down the barriers as it relates to a terminally ill patient, which is the heart of Ryan's Law, but they expanded that to all medical cannabis patients. And so what the genius is behind Ryan's Law is not just that terminally ill patients now can use cannabis in a hospital or healthcare environment, but it forces these medical institutions to integrate cannabis into the hospital setting. Because like Nurse Heather mentioned, or maybe you mentioned in the beginning, when California passed Prop 215 in 1996, the ink wasn't even dry on the legislation, because it takes 30 days to certify the voting results. And on the 30th day, when they certified Prop 215, the then drug czar of the United States told all the doctors in California that if you attempt to recommend cannabis, we're going to revoke your DEA privileges to write pharmaceuticals. That then kicked off a 5-year struggle, which we won. and has never been brought up again. But in the meantime, doctors out there got the impression, oh my God, I can't get involved in this cannabis stuff because I'll lose my DEA privileges. And Debbie, that scar tissue exists today. Nurse Heather and I made multiple presentations in different jurisdictions, and we always see these doctors coming up now, oh, we can't do that. We don't know what an endocannabinoid system is, you know.
We could just stay on this topic here and discuss this
Yeah.
forever, but I'd like to dive in a little bit deeper into rescheduling and the hemp laws and what's happening. But from your perspective, what is the biggest disconnect between policymakers and believing what is happening and what patients are actually living? Because I think there's a real disconnect between our politicians and what we're trying to do and what patients are actually going through.
Yeah. I'll
Heather?
speak to this first, and then Ken, you can jump in about, the policy makers. But one of the things that I've witnessed is that policymakers who have no experience with cannabis, their loved one hasn't had an issue that cannabis has helped resolve. They personally have never had an experience with cannabis that has helped heal them in some way. Those politicians they just don't get it. I don't know how else to put it besides they just don't get it. But what we do see is that policymakers, when they've had an experience that's personal to them, a loved one who had cancer and cannabis helped ease their symptoms, a politician who had a child with traumatic brain injury and seizures, that all of a sudden this strange oil is now helping to eliminate the seizures that every medication, every pharmaceutical that they tried just was not covering. They get it. And so it's hard to say, there's a disconnect. There is a disconnect, and it comes down to experiencing it for yourself or having a loved one that has experienced the healing power of cannabis. And, there's this disease of rightness that, people think that they're right. I am right. My perspective is right. And the stigma is so thick around cannabis, and it has been for so many years because of prohibition, that it's very difficult for some people to get out of their own rightness unless they have been in a situation where there was nothing else that they could do, and they clung to this hope and prayer of cannabis, and all of a sudden, wow, this plant medicine is working for my loved one. And once they've had that experience, that disconnect goes away. So you're right, the disconnect between the policymakers and the patients is there. And what dissolves that is experiencing the power, the healing power of this beautiful plant medicine.
That's beautifully well said.
But with that said, we still need to figure out a way to reach these politicians and how to convince them. And I don't know that convince is the right word, but to show them, first and foremost, you're born with an endocannabinoid system. And if you're not paying attention to that, your health is being challenged every day. And once it becomes dysregulated, it's almost impossible to get it back if you're not engaging with those receptors in another way. And cannabis is one plant that can do that. So, Ken, do you have any suggestions of how that could possibly be reached?
No, but
I would say
have
it's
this,
the stories, Ken. I mean, you and I both have been to these public hearings, these city meetings where we stand before our policymakers and legislators, and the stories do matter sometimes. When you have people come out and tell their stories, it does touch some of the policymakers. If it's not their own story, sometimes they can be touched. I mean, look what Charlotte Figge did. Look at what happened when Sanjay Gupta did the first CNN special, Weed. I remember being in the car listening to it on the radio because I was traveling, and just tears pouring down my face. I said, this is it. All these years, the policymakers and the legislators have said, what about the kids? We got to protect the kids. And here it is. Yes, what about the kids? We have to protect the kids. We have to provide medicine for the kids. And so I believe stories matter. But go ahead, Kenny.
No, I mean, and I couldn't, so Debbie, basically, depends on the time of day that you'd ask me that question. Because part of that day I would be telling you, oh my God, look what we've really done in 30 years. Isn't that amazing? And then the other time I'm looking at the side view of my car, except the opposite of what it says. It's saying, you know, objects in the mirror are further away than they appear, you know. And so there's so much more to be done. But yeah, so the whole structure of government elections and everything else really comes into that. And as long as the check writing to support those candidates and to help them get reelected becomes the key to unlock that door to their private office, then we'll always be somewhat behind because we just don't have that key. We don't have those resources. And they're not, you know, I don't want to blame them. They're dealing with lots of issues, and people are pressuring them from all sides on different subjects that are even more important sometimes than cannabis policy. But, you know, they just don't have, I can't say truthfully that in about 30, 25 years of doing this kind of work that I've ever seen a legislator or policymaker actually read even the Wikipedia version of the endocannabinoid system. And I believe that if any of them took the time and read that, they would have a totally different and completely different view of the issue. But it just doesn't happen that way. Nurse Heather and I, she was at a brilliant, when she testified at the U.S. Virgin Islands Senate, and yet they brought in the 6 opponents who were all psychiatrists or psychologists to testify against it. And I told our senator, who we were helping write the legislation for, I said, just ask him if they know what the human endocannabinoid system is. And sure enough, he asked each of the 6 ones if they knew, and they had no answer. No, we don't know. But their testimony was, there's no room in this man's Virgin Islands for marijuana, you know. And I just see some level of futility in doing that. And although Nurse Heather's answer was brilliant.
I think that both of you gave really good answers there. So, you know, I think that we need to be looking at it from both sides. I say if we can change one person's mind today, or if we can influence one person's mind today, if we can educate one policy leader on the endocannabinoid system, that's when I think the shift can happen. So I agree with you on that. And instead of taking it on as such a big project, I think of us taking it on one by one, because that's how we all got here, one by one. And it would be nice if we could put it all in a big bowl and put a bow around it and send it off and it worked that way. But I think it's individual, working with individuals. So thank you for
and
that.
Just really quickly to say the endocannabinoid system that they didn't know, you can't blame these medical professionals for not knowing. We were not taught this in our schooling. Okay. And the first time that I learned about the endocannabinoid system, I was like, wait, what? Are you kidding me? I was stunned. And the top of my head blew off. I said, you've got to be kidding me. We have a whole human body system that I didn't learn about in nursing school. And so then I started to investigate this and went, whoa, this is out there. I didn't even know to look for it, to understand it, to search deeper, because it wasn't part of my world until it was. And then once I understood that, it became my mission to share that with everybody. So Ken knows I'll go to my own doctor and I'll say before I leave, but I bet you sometime today you're going to Google endocannabinoid system, aren't you? Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. And that's it. And I'll just drop these little seeds because I am a gardener. I like to drop little seeds. And hopefully, like you said, Debbie, one will take root and grow. One person at a time can hopefully look up that information, have the intellectual curiosity to say, endocannabinoid system, what was she talking about? Oh, wow, this is a big deal. Because the endocannabinoid system is about so much more than cannabis. We thank cannabis for being the master teacher that she is, because the investigation on cannabis is what led us to understand that we had this entire human body receptor system that is, every day I learn something more intriguing about. But, you know, the endocannabinoid system exists not because of cannabis. It exists because of its need to create and keep homeostasis within the human body. And so it was just cannabis that opened that door to knowledge for us. So doctors need to get away from the stigma and the fear of cannabis, the plant, and really take hold of this information and the care of the endocannabinoid system, which can be a root cause for disease. And that's why it works for so many different symptoms and diseases and illnesses. So
Beautifully put. And I totally agree with you. When I came across the endocannabinoid system, I was like, what is this? I didn't learn anything about this in the 70s. Well, how could I? It hadn't even been discovered yet. So, we are way behind. But one of the things I often say, if we had just learned about the cardiovascular or the respiratory system, let's say in the late 1980s, and we weren't talking about it and we weren't incorporating it into our health, where would we be today? This is the conversation that we need to be having with our medical professionals, is that you're ignoring a system that plays a key role just like those other systems. In fact, it's the master regulator, like Heather said.
And when this new information comes to light, instead of rejecting it, I feel that we have a responsibility as an evolving human species to leap to that new knowledge, to embrace it, and to try and seek to understand. And I do believe that we would be so much further down the line in medical cannabis if we had some intellectual curiosity where our medical providers would leap to embrace this new knowledge.
And I would just say, because you have patients out there who listen in your audience, but Nurse Heather has a Cannabis Nurses Network, cannabisnursesnetwork.com, and she's got some really good educational material available on that. She does an amazing presentation on the human ECS, methods of utilizing it and things like that. And even though it's more oriented toward nurses and health professionals, it's done in a really simple and easy to understand way. So they may want to check that out, get some more information. It might be helpful to them. But I know it's like A Few Good Men, the movie, that you're probably wanting to get to the Code Red question at some point here.
Yes, I am. We're going to go there right now. So there's been a lot of conversation around rescheduling. And just yesterday, on 4/23/26, the Trump administration moved to reclassify cannabis as a Schedule III drug. Based on what you're hearing right now, what should patients realistically expect? And how soon will they see change?
Well, they won't see a whole lot of change in the immediate future until such time as the actual rescheduling occurs. And even then, they may not see anything for years after that, because that only will apply essentially to FDA drugs. However, it does have some initial impacts. And I ended up seeing this posting from the DOJ, Department of Justice, about 46 minutes after it was announced yesterday morning. And one of my major takeaway was it's still somewhat like the arsonist who wants to be recognized and honored for putting out the fire that he started, because we, of course, know that Biden initiated the process and it was scheduled to go to hearings in 2024 before the election occurred, and it got pushed aside until now. But I want to give credit where credit's due. This is something that is a very positive step forward, and I'm very happy about it. The immediate impacts are that it will reduce the cost of cannabis. It'll do that in an indirect way, because basically they've now designated as part of that order, one, that we're going to expedite the rescheduling process, and that's a government process. Administratively, that takes a while to play out. But number two, they've immediately designated that any cannabis that's produced from a California dispensary, and you can insert Oregon, Washington, Arizona, any of the state-approved programs, and all of those are now retrospectively considered the sale of a Schedule III drug. And there's an Internal Revenue Code section that applies to those of us who are in the commercial setting of cannabis production and sale that recognize that 280E essentially applies to drug cartels, and it prohibits those business organizations from deducting their ordinary business expenses when they're paying their federal tax. And all of these places pay tax. That alone will save those business organizations 30%, or close to 30%, depending on exactly what state it happens. But it'll save about 30%. And those costs will definitely be passed down. That's just the way the marketplace works. So those cost savings will be passed down, and our patients and customers will probably experience a less burden on their pocketbook. But rescheduling itself will reduce some of the more onerous criminal penalties that apply when you're talking about Schedule 1. And it is a move in the right direction. Like I tell people all the time, I mean, would you rather be in Schedule 1 that states that it has no medical purpose and has very serious criminal penalties, or would you rather be in Schedule 3 that has much less onerous? So that's the way I see it. And I will give you my favorite quote from, because this is something that not many, probably your listeners will know. But if you read the letter announcing this new DOJ policy, so to speak, this executive order, I'm going to quote this because it's important. Quote, "This action recognizes the longstanding regulation of medical marijuana by state governments and a need for the common sense approach to this reality." Federal government has never said that. Even during the Obama years when we got those very favorable DOJ memos, that is a complete capitulation to the rights of the states who have developed over these 30 years their own policies and programs consistent with the Controlled Substances Act. This is the first acknowledgement that I've ever seen by the federal government that these state programs are okay. In fact, the last time they contested it was actually in 2015, right here in California, in San Francisco, in a case called U.S. versus Mam. And Judge Breyer of that district court was the one who ruled that, yes, cannabis is protected from federal intervention by virtue of the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. So we've had that in place for almost 11 years now. But that statement alone is priceless, I think. So hopefully I answered your question. But
You did. And Heather, so with everything that Ken just said there, do you see this opening up the door more for medical professionals and practitioners to want to maybe explore this? Or is there still something that we really need to be addressing that's not addressed?
This will force, at this point, healthcare providers to start looking at it, which is something we've been trying to get them to do voluntarily for years. But before I even go into that, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are here today with medical and adult use cannabis off the backs of the patients who have fought for their rights to use this plant for decades. And I want to thank them because we would not be here without them. Okay? So to the patients, the advocates, the legacy operators, the people who have spent their entire lives fighting for the freedom of this plant and the freedom to use this plant without being put in jail or having criminal prosecution against them, I know that they feel mixed feelings about this right now. And they are absolutely valid to feel the way that they feel. We don't know what this is exactly going to look like. But like Ken says, you know, in the states where we can continue to grow our own medicine, we need to do that. I would love to push for more ability. I mean, I am first and foremost a gardener and a little earth child, and I love to grow my own food. And food to me is medicine. Therefore, I grow my own medicine. And there is such therapeutic effects from being able to work with the earth to produce something that is healthy for you. that is what these legacy operators and these patients have been doing for years. And so I want to acknowledge their emotions and their feelings about this shift, where in a way it feels like big government, big pharma, big industry is taking something that they had fought for and they're going to run and leave them in the dust. And I believe it's up to us as nurses to step in and make sure that our patients are not lost in this translation and lost in this transition, that the patients who brought us to this point are at the forefront of this. With that, I do believe that because it went from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, that the healthcare providers are now going to go, oh, I need to know something about this. The work that we've been doing for Ryan's Law was a giant leap for mankind, as Ken would say. That is the first legislation that we've ever had that forced cannabis into the healthcare setting. It is a mandate that hospitals and healthcare facilities must write a policy for a terminally ill patient to be able to use their cannabis while receiving inpatient care. That was huge. And because of Ryan's Law, that was pushing healthcare providers to have more knowledge, to seek more knowledge, to understand what it was like to care for a patient using cannabis. Well, now that cannabis is a Schedule 3, this is going to place that onus, that responsibility on every doctor, every nurse, every healthcare professional that is working with a patient who will be utilizing this medicine, whether, as they're putting it, FDA cannabis, which is pharmaceutical cannabis, cannabinoid medicines, or through state licensed cannabis products. Our patients are using this. And it is our responsibility to be educated on what it requires of us to care for a patient who is using these products. And then a step further from that, which we've already spoken about, endocannabinoid system care. Every single patient, whether they're using cannabis or not, has an endocannabinoid system. I have one, you have one, every one of your listeners has one. And so it is imperative that we begin to educate all doctors, all nurses, all CNAs, every healthcare professional begins to have in their curriculum the endocannabinoid system as standard education. And so it's my hope that with this rescheduling, that there will be a trickle down or a ripple effect that will touch every aspect of human care, and that we can begin to care for people as a whole and include cannabis and cannabinoid therapeutics within our practice.
And I'll add on to that. I think that it should be taught in our general schools in general, that you have an endocannabinoid system. We're taught about respiratory systems. We're talked about all of our other systems, and we're leaving that one out. And I want my grandchildren to know about it now, not have to wait the years that I had to wait, or that the years that you both had to wait to learn about it.
Hear, hear. Yes, health class. I mean, it was a teaching of all the things, add this in. It is a human body system that it's, the fact that we just learned about it in the late 80s, not early 90s, that's no excuse that we're now in 2026. Let's get this information into the textbooks and begin to educate all people about their human bodies so they can care for themselves.
They don't need the textbook. They just need the nurse Heather's 1 hour or so video on what's the endocannabinoid system. It's already there.
It's there, and it's, that's something we feature every month in the newsletter. We have a feature on what is the ECS, and we do it from multiple people. So, we can have multiple voices, but what you end up with is the exact same conversation, no matter who's sharing it. It's just a different person doing it in a different form. It doesn't change it, though. It's the system, and it's being taught the same way. So, I love everything that Heather does. I think that she brings such a good voice to this conversation. And if you haven't checked out CNN, Cannabis Nurses Network, check it out.
We have a great YouTube channel where, just as you said, Debbie, although the information is the information, it is so powerful to hear from different voices. People here understand, listen better depending on who's delivering that information. And so we have so many wonderful voices at the Cannabis Nurses Network YouTube channel, from patients to doctors, and all the nurses in between. And so absolutely, if your listeners are interested, we've got long conversations, we've got short conversations there. So anything that's of interest to your listeners, hopefully they can find some value from that YouTube channel.
Well, we have 8 billion people on the planet, and we all learn in different ways. And I also think when we have multiple people talking on the same topic, then it becomes more, oh, I need to know about this. If we just have one voice saying this, you're just one voice. But the more people we have having this conversation, and, there's going to be tidbits from everybody that's a little bit different. And I think it's important to hear that. I listen to everybody's conversation on the endocannabinoid system because I think I might learn something new, or it might give me a new insight, or it might just be something I want to pass along. I think it's really important. So thank you for that.
And I love what Raphael Mechoulam had said, and I'm going to botch this quote. It's not exact, but the sentiment is there. You can make the endocannabinoid system as complex as you want, but the truth is it's quite simple. That to me is where we have a responsibility to simplify it to the point that people go, oh, I have an endocannabinoid system, and it's receptors, and it's, that you understand that it is a natural part of who you are, and that the plant cannabis can help support the function of this system. But there are other things as well that you can do, from your nutrition to your movement to your exercise to your breathing to being outside and enjoying nature, that too can support and enrich your endocannabinoid system. And when patients and people in general start to grasp that knowledge in a simplified way, they go, wow, isn't that amazing? Maybe I don't need to take 25 medications. Maybe I can just use this plant medicine and get in my garden and play in the dirt and, laugh with my grandkids.
Well, and I think a lot of people are experiencing it on a daily basis and are not aware of it. And so once you understand the endocannabinoid system, then you can make that connection. Oh, when I go out and take a walk and I smell the pine trees and it gives me this feeling, that's me engaging my ECS, and it's bringing me back into calm and into peace. And so when you understand that, then okay, next time I'm pretty stressed out and I need some calm. I need to just go take that walk. It gives you really good tools that you can use yourself without even having to engage with the plant cannabis. But for those people that have a dysregulated endocannabinoid system, that's where cannabis can become really a tool and really help, because trying to re-regulate that system when we've lived with so many health issues is not so easy. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. So with rescheduling cannabis on one side and the potential changes to the federal hemp policy on the other, are these truly separate conversations when it comes to therapeutic cannabinoid use? Or are they part of the same patient access ecosystem, considering both ultimately interact with the same biological system in your body? And I know we just talked about that ECS, but those two systems are separated, cannabis and hemp.
Yeah, that again is Ken can fill in the blanks on this, but what I feel is that although they're trying to, again, complicate something that's very simple, hemp is one variety of cannabis and medical marijuana is another variety of cannabis. It just has to do with the number of cannabinoids and terpenoids and all of those things that are in the plant. To me, the plant is a plant is a plant. I remember when I went to my first experience going to a hemp farm, and I walked in and I went, this looks just like a cannabis cultivation. They go, yeah, right? And so that for me, I went, oh, I get it. Same, only different really on paper and through lab results. I know that they're trying to make this different. To the advocates who are working this stuff through, this isn't the government taking over. This is really like the system catching up to what you as advocates fighting for this plant have been saying from the beginning. And so, even with Jack Herrera, there's this great medical marijuana strain called Jack Herrera, but he was talking about hemp. Also, a lot of what Jack Herrera spoke about was hemp. The hemperor has no clothes, right? And so the word itself can be used synonymously, and it's really only differentiated legally. And Ken can definitely dive into that more than I can, because it really just comes down to the level of THC in that specific plant product. Kenny?
Yes, I would just simply say that I haven't really evaluated all the merits or lack thereof of the many Senate bills and other legislation that are pending. And I explained to Debbie my apologies for not having done so, but I usually don't look at those until there's something that's on the verge of a vote to pretty much get an idea of where it's going to take us. And the whole controversies that are surrounding CBD are just something that I'm not interested in. CBD is a valuable cannabinoid that has some tremendous medicinal value and is easily and readily available at a very low cost in California, and will continue to remain so, and I suspect will be so in all of those other states. It's an amazing plant, the hemp plant. We've seen it grow, Nurse Heather and I have, in the middle of the Nevada desert, in the middle of the summer, with huge flowers and outdoors, requiring minimal agricultural expense, and then being able to be processed into extracts, crystalline, and other forms that we use. And CBD is just what I have always said is, based on the literature that I've reviewed, if I had a young child that was going to be involved in contact sports, that I would want them taking CBD because of the amazing benefits as a neuroprotectant, and the notion that during 3 different age groups between the ages 0 and 18, the highest death rate among those children is traumatic brain injury. So that's in every research article that I've read in the last 10 years that has described their evaluation of cannabis for health conditions, basically say THC is good, CBD is good, but the two together are the best. And that's kind of our whole plant philosophy and everything else. So I'm not sure what will happen with all the legislation, Debbie, but I am absolutely certain that CBD will be available as a product. I mean, the toothpaste is out of the tube. You can't get that back in. How legal it will be and at what level of production. I mean, yeah, there's big people making big money off CBD. And those big people making big money maybe have to make a little less money. But there's also a lot of little people in the space that are also growing it, processing it, and selling it. And the FDA and nobody else is going to pay attention to it. I mean, it just isn't. So again, I think CBD is going to be valuable and available regardless of what the Senate does or doesn't do. And as long as in our California cannabis dispensaries, we sell cannabis with THC and cannabis-derived CBD, not from hemp.
And I just want to add one other thing about hemp. I mean, hemp is not only good for humans, it can be used as feed for livestock. It can be used as agricultural, for paper, for rope, for building construction. It can remediate the soil. It's good for the earth. It's good for the animals. It's good for humans. So when we're talking about this broad range of cannabis, from hemp to the medical strains or medical cultivars and everything in between, we're not just talking about healing for humans. We are talking about healing for humanity and the environment and everything in between. And I just have such a deep love and respect for this plant that, I'm grateful that the government is moving forward with things. They stumble and fall and do not so smart things all the time. But just to bring it back around to this rescheduling and the fact that it's in the news, that people are paying attention to it, that they're trying to move things forward, Is it the way that I would want it to be? No, I want it to be descheduled. Deschedule this plant, let people grow it in their backyards, just right next to their tomatoes. That's what I want. But I'm not going to, as Ken would say, look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm going to say, okay, we're making steps forward. How can we be active in helping to guide the future of where this is going, staying on top of the information and holding their feet to the fire to make sure that the choices that are being made are good for what it is that we're trying to do. Now, I'm not sure if Schedule 3 is going to be that successful. They may do Schedule 3 and in 10 more years go, this is ridiculous. We need to totally deschedule it. And so we never know where this is going to lead. So, every step forward is a step forward. And I know a lot of activists are thinking this is a step back. And I just can't get on board with that it's a step back. I do see that it's going somewhere, and we need to be there to make our voices heard.
And I think that it's really important for us that are so passionate about this that we get on committees and start working to define what this looks like and to put in the education. That's one of the things that I see that's missing the most on all of this is the education around it and why it's so beneficial and how we need to get it right. So I think that, in the policy making, they need our voices there. It's not just the policymaker and the person that's advocating for the change. They need the patient's voices as well. And I would like to see that happen. So with that said, do you see any way of how we can make sure that we can include the patient's voices so that they can be involved in helping to structure where this is going to go? Or is that just something that I'm way off track on?
I don't think you're off track with that. I believe that the people who are impacted need to have their voices heard. I always encourage patients to attend your hearings, your city hearings. When they were calling for comments with this rescheduling to begin with, I hope that patients were writing in their comments. Don't just think that your voice doesn't matter. Your voice matters, but you have to stand up in the moments when people are asking for it and speak up. Speak your truth. Tell your story. Don't be afraid, and don't feel like you're just one person, because one person can make a big difference. So tell your story. Speak up. And people will either listen or they won't, but at least you did your part. And that's what this entire movement has been about, people standing up and doing their part. And this is on the back of patients. So their voices matter.
And join and combine with others in organizations. Cannabis Nurses Network has their advocacy as well. NORML, NORML, the Marijuana Policy Project, and the Americans for Safe Access. Americans for Safe Access, when we brought them Ryan's Law and prepared how to implement Ryan's Law, they immediately put it up on their website. They volunteered any of their attorneys to help enforce it if it became an issue with hospitals that weren't following it. And so there's great organizations. Depending on the size of the community you live in, there's probably either an ASA or a NORML group either in your community or nearby. So, and of course, joining Debi's organization. So tell a friend, join this organization.
Thank you. And I think that, that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't see or hear, that there are so many organizations out here trying to advocate for the patient. And that's what has brought us where we are. We seem to forget a lot of times the reason we have a medical marijuana program is because of the patient. It wasn't for any other purpose. And so if we hadn't have had the medical marijuana program developed for the patient, we wouldn't be here having adult use programs and probably getting to reschedule 3. So I think that we have to honor the patient and never leave them behind.
Yeah, this is a result of decades of advocacy, and this is the reality today. This is the impact that you have made. This is your impact.
And I hear a lot of times, well, it's not going to go the way that we think it should go. And I go back and look at over history and over time how we have created new systems and engaged with something new. We can look at the industrial period when we went from steamships moving things through and factories running off of steam, and how we came up with modern technology and how that changed and everybody was worried what it would do. We survived. We created a system. Same thing with networking technology and the internet. It may not necessarily have looked the way that I thought it was going to look when I was involved in creating the networking technology, but it's created some great resources and some benefits for people. It's giving us the opportunity to have these conversations right here that we're having right now. And so it's just working with it and making sure that we're building it to serve the patient and making sure that their voices are never lost. So we've talked about Ryan's Law and touched on it quite a bit. I would just like to know, does this new reschedule to 3 do anything to help us move Ryan's Law forward, or does it not really do anything but still keep us stuck knocking on doors, walking up the steps, trying to get our politicians to listen to us? Because Ryan's Law is so important for anybody that's entering a hospital, anybody that's in hospice, and an end of life.
I think this is going to accelerate our movement with Ryan's Law. I don't know what you feel, Ken, but for me, this is going to make Ryan's Law an easier pill to swallow for all of those policymakers, maybe the hospital association, who has been our staunchest opponent. I believe that having this shifting in the rescheduling is going to be an absolute game changer for accelerating Ryan's Law nationwide. What are your thoughts, Ken?
Well, the recent example is Virginia, which now has a new governor, Spanberger, and now has a Democrat majority in both of their legislation houses, and now is going to probably elect out of their 11 congressmen, 10 of them could be Democrats. So that just happened this week. But Virginia's kind of interesting because they're currently going back and forth with the legislature and the governor to pass a kind of a Ryan's Law. But one of the elements that they inserted into it is that it wouldn't be effective until the government reschedules it to Schedule 3. So that's kind of one effect. I mean, who knows, maybe now they'll consider that, since essentially it's a Schedule 3 right now based upon that executive order. We'll see what they do with it. I tried to explain to them and to Connecticut, because Connecticut was trying to not put the mandate in, and the groups that opposed Ryan's Law were saying, oh my God, the sky is falling, the federal government's going to come after us. And I would just say to Connecticut legislators, listen, you've had a program for 13 years. Federal government has never filed a case against you. And now we have this statement that I read before. This action recognizes the longstanding regulation of medical marijuana by state government and a need for a common sense approach to this reality. So yeah, hopefully Connecticut will wake up and put the mandate back in, because they've never been sued in 13 years by the federal government. And if anything, we're showing tremendous progress with this executive order. And maybe hopefully, the legislature and Spanberger will realize that they're really going off track by requiring the actual rescheduling. Cannabis exists in this country not because of the federal government, but in spite of the federal government. And Debbie, you know that. It's always been that way, and it still is that way, and it'll continue to be that way in the future. We exist because the Controlled Substances Act specifically provided that states and U.S. territories were entitled to have their own drug policies, period. We exist because a very progressive Republican legislature, Rohrabacher, from just up the street from our house in Orange County, California, teamed up with a couple of Democrats and created this Rohrabacher-Farr amendment, which told the federal government, you have to stay away from states that have a state-regulated system. And we exist for those reasons and really for nothing else. And from that, we've grown to 40 states and 5 U.S. territories that have a medical program, 26 of which have an adult use program. And so that's all already predicated on that. But Nurse Heather's quite correct. I think at least the symbolism of moving to Schedule 3 will be a game changer.
I sure hope so. I think this is something that's needed in every state. I think it's needed globally because no matter where you live and you live with chronic health issues, end of life is coming. We need to have access to medicine that makes it available for us to be available with our family. It is not fun to be at a place where you cannot engage with your family, especially at the end of life. But even when you're in a hospital and you're struggling, you need to be aware of what's going on and being able to take care and manage those symptoms in a way that is true to what you need and not because it's a medical prescription that a doctor thinks that you need. So I really hope that we can move this forward. And we've covered this a few times in the newsletter, and we'll continue to cover this because I think it's so important. So what would be your best advice to someone who wanted to advocate for change, but they have serious chronic health conditions and cannot make it to maybe the legislator to talk or to walk up the steps of Capitol? What would you suggest that they do?
And, that's the value you have as a citizen, is your ability to communicate with your legislator. And when you've decided on what your message is, whether you want a change in the law or you want easier access or whatever changes that you seek, just be persistent. And you have to be persistent. And then otherwise reach out to these organizations, and many of them will probably either have emails or newsletters or things of that nature, so you don't have to physically be there. And start networking and communicating with them. And if you can't attend a meeting because you're physically incapacitated or it's not easy to move around, you'll find a member on one of those groups that does attend the meetings, and they probably will pass your message along to them. But it's just be persistent, be consistent. Rome is not going to be built in a day. And we were just in Rome, and that took centuries and centuries to build. It was a beautiful city, but it's just not built in a day. And, you have to be somewhat patient and circumspect about it. We're sitting here 30 days from November, first Tuesday following the first Monday in November, 30 years ago. California passed the first Medical Cannabis Act. And so much progress has been made, but it wasn't done in a day.
I was just going to say another thing that someone who was severely ill can do is really inspire those around you, inspire your caregivers, inspire your family members, inspire your nurses and your doctors. Your nurses are your advocate. That is our role. That is our job. Inspire your nurses to come and check out Cannabis Nurses Network so that we can help give them the tools to know how to advocate on your behalf. That is what we do as nurses, is advocate for patients and stand for those who cannot stand for themselves in those moments. And that's really what you can do is be that spark that lights the flame in somebody else if you're too sick to get up and do it yourself.
Thank you for that. I think that we need to all be inspiring every day someone within our medical community to at least learn about the ECS, but also to go join groups like CNN Network and get knowledge from people that have learned this, that have been practicing in this, and have been helping patients along the way, so that they can actually hear firsthand. That's one of the beauties of the newsletter, is we do the research and then we do firsthand stories so that we can back up, this is what the research says, and then this is what is actually happening, and this is what the results are. When we can see the results and bring them forward, it's a lot easier to grasp than talking about this system that no one can see. And yes, you can feel it, but it's hard to grasp, and it's really not that complicated, as Heather has said. So it's really pretty simple. So for someone listening who is struggling with their health, what questions should they be asking their providers right now that they may not even realize they have the right to ask?
You can start, like Ken says, by asking your doctor if they are familiar with the endocannabinoid system. Ask your doctor, what should I be doing to bolster or build or support my endocannabinoid system? As Ken said already, go to pubmed.gov, search up your medical condition with cannabis or endocannabinoid system in the title. Pull up, read it. You know, you can just read an abstract. If it seems juicy, print it off. Take it to your doctor. Don't expect an answer right away. Don't get confrontational with your doctor or you'll turn them off. But at the end of a meeting with your doctor, with an appointment, you say, "Doc, I found this information really interesting. Could you review it? And I would like to talk about it the next time that I come in." That gives your doctor the amount of time that they need to look at that information, digest it, and have some kind of understanding, because for that doctor, it may be the first time they're ever hearing about it. And doctors don't like to feel like they don't know something or that they're being told that they're wrong. Give them some time to review that information, and that will go a long way for you. I can guarantee it.
Or just join CNN Ask Cannabis Nurse Heather, because when I want to know about a medication, I generally want to know it and hear it from a nurse, because in every instance in my life when I've received a medication, it's from a nurse. And that's really what they do. They engage in dialogue with the doctors to know and understand the medicine that they're giving, and then they're in a position to explain it to the patient. They don't have the prescription writing privilege, but you don't need that in cannabis, so...
I think that's a really important part, because I think that our first engagement in our medical office is with a nurse. And so we should be bridging this conversation with them and handing them the same information that we might be handing a doctor. And then hopefully the two will have a conversation, and then they will both become knowledgeable in it, because we can't assume that every nurse is aware of what cannabis is. It's amazing how many times I ran into a nurse that doesn't even know what that is. And I don't know how that is, with as much as this talk is about it, but I live in this world, so maybe that's why I think that way. But I think that it's educating everyone within that office. It's not just one person. So thank you for that. So let's go out on a limb here and let's finish this up with, if we were to design a system that truly supports patient health, where would cannabis, hemp, and the endocannabinoid system fit in, and what needs to change to get us there?
You know, I'm just going to say I live in an environment where I am a board-certified holistic nurse. I'm a board-certified health and wellness nurse coach. I live in the realm where the endocannabinoid system, plant medicines, and all of the things that can be supportive of the endocannabinoid system is part of the care that I'm ready to provide. Mainstream health care is coming along in terms of holistic care, but we're still very much in a system that is not quite there yet, right? So I would love to see naturopathic doctors having the same rights and privileges as a medical doctor, because a naturopathic doctor has all the same education that a medical doctor has, except they also have additional information about plant medicines, and they have the holistic framework for it. So what I would love to see is a nutritionist and a naturopathic doctor and a holistic nurse working together to care for a whole patient and to really be able to provide those therapies, treatments, knowledge, wisdom, information to a patient so that they can take care of themselves. It really comes down to empowering a patient to care for themselves when they can, and then have those other medical systems in place that can care for a patient when they're unable to do for themselves. But I believe that education and support can go a very, very long way when we're looking at a whole person, including the endocannabinoid system, including plant medicines and nutrition. But I don't know how we get there. We just keep plugging along.
We keep plugging along, but I think that the key to that is collaboration, and that you are, as an individual, it's your health, and you need to advocate for yourself and find the resources that fit into your need for your health. Just because you go into a doctor's office and they are not interested in learning doesn't mean you have to stay there. Go find some place and work with someone that is more willing to approach this conversation with you. But you can't do it alone. It's a collaborative.
That's right, Debbie. Fire your doctor if they won't have these conversations, because really at this stage of the game, you're paying for a service. And if you don't like the service that you're getting, go find service elsewhere, because there's a lot of doctors and options out there for people. And get a nurse. I mean, you have your own hairdresser, you have your own massage therapist, you have your own, nail tech. Go get yourself a nurse. It can be just a valuable resource to have a nurse in your pocket that can help guide you through some of these things and support you and empower you in your own health and well-being.
So do you have any idea, Heather, how many nurses are certified or registered or qualified to work within the cannabis space?
I wouldn't have a number on that. I failed to mention at this point that the American Nurses Association in 2023 actually deemed cannabis nursing as a recognized specialty in nursing. That was huge. The fact that cannabis nursing is a specialty really sets the stage for all of this rescheduling. And as you said, this collaboration to be able to move cannabinoid therapeutics into mainstream medicine with nurses. Nurses have always been at the forefront. Doctors have lagged behind. I love our doctors. I don't mean to speak ill of them, but nurses have led the way in cannabinoid therapeutics. It is a fact. We've been caring for patients in their endocannabinoid systems and supporting patients in their product choices and uses of cannabis. And so, cannabis nursing is a specialty, and I don't have the numbers on how many nurses are certified to be able to care for this, but I've been doing this work for 20 years and I never needed a piece of paper that said I was certified to do it. I've just been doing it. So as a patient, ask those questions of your nurses, and you'll find the right people to bring into your realm as part of your care team to help you get where you want to be in your health and well-being.
And do you have a directory, Heather, on your website of different nurses in different states?
We don't, and the reason why is because it's still, up until this point, it's still a little bit scary for some nurses that are working in this space. There's nurses that do their cannabis nursing on the side because their normal daytime job, if they knew that they were doing that, they may not be working in that space. It started to ease over time, but nurses have requested that their names not necessarily be out there in a list fashion. So that's the reason that we've kept those nurses a little bit private. But you can, as Ken said, you can come and join the Cannabis Nurses Network and you'll find all of them right in there. And, you can jump in for $15 a month at the low end and get to know some of your cannabis nurses there.
And we have a directory at the newsletter as well for any professionals that are in this space, and everybody's welcome to add their name to that space, because I think it's important to know where we can go look for references to reach to somebody within our state that we can sit down and talk to.
Beautiful. So thank you for doing that, Debbie. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I think, every one of us are important in this conversation, and we matter because we're taking something forward that actually is important for improving quality of life today. No one chooses to live in chronic illness, and everyone should have the right to choose the medicine that fits their body the best and serves them the best.
I mean, if I was to say, number one, deschedule it. Number two, I kind of like the California model and other states that allow you to grow your own plant. And I think those two changes alone would begin to treat cannabis, which is really a nutraceutical. I mean, let's face it, but it's a natural plant. And that would get us back to just common sense and give people the freedom to choose what it is, like you said, Debbie, that helps their own personal health. So
thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
As we wrap up this conversation, one thing becomes very clear. Policy can change, schedules can shift, laws can evolve. But if the patient's still left navigating confusion, lack of education, and limited support, then we haven't truly solved the problem. What we've talked about today isn't just about cannabis, it's about the bigger gap in healthcare, where the system within the body, the endocannabinoid system, are still not being fully recognized or integrated into care. And that leaves people searching for answers, often on their own. When people understand how their body is designed to create balance, when they begin to ask better questions, and when they become active participants in their health, that's where change really begins. So if something in this conversation resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Stay curious, ask questions, seek out education that helps you understand your body in a deeper way. Because when the real root causes of health struggles start to be explored, new possibilities open. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and we'll see you in the next Effective Cannabis Conversation. We so appreciate you dropping in. Your time and support are invaluable as we strive to educate and advocate for the transformative potential of medical cannabis. Remember, you have only one health and one life, and no one lives them but you. Let's continue this journey together. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest conversations. Your comments and engagement fuel the dialogue we need to create change. Until next time, stay empowered and keep exploring the wonders of your endocannabinoid system.